Hello all again, Dr. JC here, Lecture 2. In this lecture we're going to look at three different civilizations. We're going to look at ancient Phoenicia, the ancient Hebrews, and ancient Persia. So the Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Persians up next. We'll start in ancient Phoenicia. Now ancient Phoenicia geographically is along the eastern Mediterranean, or modern day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel as shown on the map here to the right. Now, the word Phoenician actually comes from the Greeks. It's thought that perhaps it's part of the underpinning writing system that the Phoenicians would create that would be the basis of the alphabet used not just in Greece but Rome and throughout Europe. Sometimes you may remember from grammar school phonics, right? That in some sense comes from the Phoenicians themselves. But historically, what we want to remember about them is they happen to be a great naval people. Trade obviously was very important, and geography dictated that. If you live along the Mediterranean Sea, if you live near Egypt, you probably ought to figure out how to sail and how to trade, right? Regarding Phoenician exploration and trade, the two maps on this slide give us some indication of their reach. Not only would they establish trading outposts throughout the Mediterranean world, all the way into the Western Mediterranean, they'd even begin to navigate out into the Atlantic Ocean. Quite a feat, quite an accomplishment for the ancient world. Regarding trading outposts, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the trading outpost in North Africa, the city-state named Carthage. I want you to keep that name Carthage in mind, because when we get to ancient Rome, those two are going to throw down, as we'll see. This happens to be a Phoenician outpost, though. So you say, all right, what in the devil are the Phoenicians able to trade? In addition to basic building materials like timber, the famed cedars of Lebanon that we still know of today, or functional items like pottery, the Phoenicians became known as providers of luxury items as well. Not just their wines in some way, shape, or form, but really their dyes. In fact, the Greeks would refer to the Phoenicians as the purple people because of this Tyrian dye, because they were able to figure out how to extract the dye from these really small rock snails, Murex rock snails. And the dye was very expensive and became just that, a luxury item. And in fact, throughout the ancient world and then all the way into Europe, as Europe begins to emerge, it became the power color, the color of royalty. We still think of purple as power and royalty to present day. Therefore, if you have luxury items, you're going to be able to trade with people of wealth and means from beyond. Hence the reason the Phoenicians were able to trade throughout much of the Mediterranean world. Now, to conclude Phoenicia here and then move on into the Hebrews and Persians next, I want you to remember a few things. Yes, that they were individuals responsible for the creation of an alphabet. They were known for their creation and trade of luxury items, such as that Tyrian purple, the purple people again, remember? But also that they were master navigators and individuals that started to establish a trading empire, establishing city-states like Carthage all throughout the ancient world. And it gives us some sense here that trade can equal power. This is something we'll talk about as we move throughout the course. So we'll move on from Phoenicia to the Hebrews next. As it relates to the Hebrews, also known as the children of Israel, I'm going to take a little different approach here because their history is so rich and so complex. I mean, we could easily spend 16 weeks on the Hebrews alone. Rather, I'm just going to go ahead and pick out some salient points associated with the Hebrews and Hebrew history moving forward through this 3-4 minute lecture here on the Hebrews. One area I want to focus on are law codes. Just as in Mesopotamia we had Hammurabi's code, in Israel, or with the Hebrews, we're going to see a different set of law codes in the form of the Ten Commandments. Now the Ten Commandments are going to come to the Hebrews through Moses during this period known as the Exodus out of Egypt. Now for those who may be unfamiliar with the story of the Ten Commandments or Moses, it might be worthwhile to take a quick second here and talk about some real brief back history as it relates to the Hebrews themselves. Now these are various different sets of peoples, different tribes as they were called, that were brought together under Father Abraham, and then behind Abraham they had Isaac, and under Isaac then we have Jacob. Jacob would later take the name Israel, hence the name Israelites. So originating in roughly the same area as the Phoenicians. Over time, some members of the Israelites, some of the tribes, had immigrated to Egypt. And in some ways it makes sense. If you're undergoing severe drought, you're having trouble making ends meet economically and otherwise in Phoenicia or the land of Canaan, why not go to the breadbasket of the Mediterranean world or the ancient world, which was Egypt, especially during its Middle Kingdom, this golden age. There's economic opportunity there. The pharaohs in the Middle Kingdom welcomed others to come and work within their borders, so their immigration policy was fairly liberal, and some of the Hebrews emigrated there. The problem was, after the Hyksos invasion, and we see the move to the new kingdom in Egypt, the pharaohs began to change policy, and they began to harden, in some sense, their policies against various ethnic groups, one such being the Hebrews. And therefore, over time, the Hebrews just became enslaved members of Egyptian society. Which leads us then naturally back into the story of Moses and the Exodus. Moses leading the Hebrews out of bondage or out of slavery in Egypt during the reign of Ramses and across the Sinai Peninsula and then back into the land of Canaan. Along the way, however, Moses, as you may know or not know, was given a set of laws or codes, these commandments, 10 of them, from the God or Most High God, and this became the basis of law within Hebrew society. Before turning to the spiritual text or Torah of the Hebrews, I wanted to talk briefly about their faith in spiritualism as well. Now, this Most High God, or one supreme being, they refer to as Yahweh. And while individuals should live according to those 10 commandments, their souls weren't damned per se if they happened to break any of those commandments. Thus, to Israelites, their Yahweh was a merciful God. He was a forgiving God, a very influential aspect of the Hebrew faith. Thus, in relation to other afterlives, such as the great below of Mesopotamians, the afterlife for Israelites really was a land of milk and honey. This was a place to look forward to going and spending an eternity. Regarding the spiritual text for Hebrews, they did have their Bible, known as the Torah or Law. It is comprised of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And in addition to establishing a lineage or bloodline to show an actual tie to the Yahweh or Most High God, that's where you get the begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat. Beyond that, the book does contain literary presence. There is some poetry to it. There's definitely history in it, and decidedly there are ethics as well. So in some sense, one can still understand why this remains an influential book in Western history. And certainly the Old Testament then will tie into a New Testament for Christians, and we'll talk about Christianity as we move forward. Lastly, and importantly, as it relates to the Hebrew Bible, is this concept of monotheism, that there really is one Most High God, a Yahweh. And that does differ from Mesopotamia and Egypt, because in those societies we see them as polytheistic and or henotheistic, not monotheistic, meaning there is one God. And for Hebrews, that God is a kind, merciful God, that you can stub your toe, you can make some mistakes, and you can still enter the land of milk and honey in eternity. To summarize the Hebrews then, as we did with the Phoenicians, would like for you to remember that they were known as, and still are remembered as, the children of Israel, that they did come up with this concept of monotheism in their Torah, or holy book, that their God was a merciful God, or Yahweh, that Moses had led them out of bondage in Egypt, and that they did, or at least were supposed to live by, a series of law codes known as the 10 Commandments. And we'll talk next about the Persians and Persian spirituality, and you can see some ties of Persian spirituality to, for sure, the Hebrews here, and later Christianity and Islam as well. So we'll turn to the Persians next. Now, when talking about ancient Persia, we're really talking about modern-day Iran. And I want to emphatically state here that Persia for some time really was the dominant power in the ancient world. As shown by this map here, quite the expansive place. I mean, they invaded places like Macedonia and Greece. So for those of you familiar with the movie 300, where these dudes are all like jacked up on muscle milk, right? Come on, give me a break. But these are those Greco-Persian wars. So they will invade Greece. They will conquer Egypt to the south and even invade India all the way to the east, getting as far as the Indus River. Now, they won't get into the Indian subcontinent, but quite an expansive place, quite a powerful civilization, quite an advanced civilization. And we'll spend a little bit of time here over the next couple of minutes talking specifically about Cyrus the Great, because if there's one name I want you to associate with ancient Persia, it's him, and Persian spirituality, Zoroastrianism. So we'll go to those next. Now, while I'd like to spend a lot of time talking about Cyrus the Great, we're just going to take a minute here and provide a few bullet points related to him. First and foremost, he gives us one of the great classical ancient examples of rule by toleration. He does. You say, okay, what's this whole deal about toleration all about? Why does that matter? Well, you can rule by being tolerant of others, or you can rule through fear. And over the next several weeks, we'll discuss, and I want you to consider the differences between rule by fear and rule via toleration. All right? Which one maybe provides greater control over the other, and which one perhaps allows for longevity in one's civilization. And we'll talk about that. As an example of Cyrus's toleration, we can look at how he treated conquered peoples. Now, when you go in and subdue another land and another people, and they surrender, they surrender all, right? You could physically go in there and kill their gods as quickly as you could kill their culture. You could do that. Cyrus actually went the other way. He embraced neighboring peoples, conquered peoples' gods. He embraced their customs and cultures and tried to create this Persian heavy or something new by grabbing and borrowing different aspects from different people's cultures to advance Persian culture even further. This is a process known as acculturation. This is where you bring together different thoughts, different customs, different mores, and create something new and unique. Cyrus the Great was really good at doing this, and it actually helps conquered peoples because the invader isn't seen as much as a conqueror as perhaps they are a liberator, right? Key point. As an example of liberty is Persian spirituality. Cyrus didn't force other peoples to embrace Zoroastrianism. He'd hoped they would, but they had a choice to do so, and that choice comes from Zoroaster or Zarathustra himself and his teaching. Now, his teachings are really part religion, part philosophy. They're captured in this spiritual book known as the Avesta or Zendavesta. And people have a choice, he says. They have a choice in this world of being good or being bad. And where you go in the next life, a concept of a heaven or hell. First time we start to hear this comes even before Judaism, before Christianity, and before Islam. Zoroastrianism posits this notion that there is a place one will go based on how one acts in this life. Therefore, if you want to go to a very good place in the next life, you better be an upstanding person in this life. Being mindful of one's actions on this earth can be seen in this important symbol associated with Zoroastrianism, the Faravahar. It's this representation of a winged bird, 3 layers of feathers representing good words, good thoughts, and good deeds. Those are the wings. That's what can make you soar. The tail feathers also in 3 layers of feathers, right? Somewhere is an example of bad words, bad thoughts, or bad deeds, and probably correctly situated too, right? Near one's backside. So if you're going to spew forth nonsense or horsepucky, right, it's not going to take you to the best place. So good thoughts, good words, good deeds. We'll see this again emerge once we get into ancient China and start to talk about some of the philosophies of order in China as well. Before we turn next to ancient India and China, I wanted to summarize ancient Persia and ask that you remember it was among the most powerful civilizations in the ancient world, was led by Cyrus the Great, excellent example of rule by toleration, and I want you to associate Zoroastrianism with ancient Persia as well. Dr. JC out, heading to India and China next.